Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's, excuse me. Matt, are you hearing feedback? Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's community meeting for the Bellwether District. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. Thanks for your patience, and we'll get started shortly. Hi, everyone. For those of you who just joined, we'll get started in just a few minutes while we wait for some participants to join. Thank you. Hi, everyone. We'll wait one more minute and then get started with tonight's presentation. Okay, let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second community meeting of 2023. My name is Mia Fioravanti, and I'm the Corporate Affairs Team Lead for the Bellwether District project. Tonight, you'll hear some great updates on the project, but before we get started, wanted to share how we'll be conducting Q&A tonight. First, we'll be taking questions following tonight's presentation, so please save your questions till the end. If you have a question, please feel free to enter it into the Q&A function in the chat throughout the meeting. If you would like to ask your question live, please raise your virtual hand, and my colleague Matt will give you the ability to show your camera and unmute your line during Q&A. Please limit live questions to one per person so we can give everyone equal time. We'll also be limiting each question and answer to 2 minutes so we can get through as many possible this evening. We will get through as many questions as we can until 7:15 p.m. tonight. And as always, if we don't get to your question, we'll post responses to both answered and any unanswered questions to our website following the meeting. But hopefully we get through all of them. So tonight you'll hear updates on our deconstruction and demolition process. You'll hear from our in-house environmental remediation team, our development team, and last, I'll provide an update on recent activity on our community work. Matt, if you go to the next slide. So to start, I just wanted to share a quick overview of HRP's commitments or investments on the Bellwether District project and how that translates to benefits for our city and region. Over the course of the project, $4 billion will be invested in the cleanup and redevelopment of the site. In the long term and on an ongoing basis, we project $100 million in annual tax revenue for the city and $120 million in annual tax revenue for the state. As part of our commitment, we're making a number of community and workforce investments, including but not limited to scholarship funding and internship opportunities and pre-apprenticeship program support. And according to our latest economic impact study, we'll add 19,000 permanent jobs and 28,000 permanent construction jobs over the next 10 to 15 years. Matthew, you go to the next slide. We'll also make significant investments in reconnecting the site to the neighboring community, investing in LEED certified buildings and other green infrastructure as part of our development plan, and of course, demolishing and cleaning up the former refinery site. Next slide. We also want to remind everyone of our current project timeline, which our development team will go into more detail on later in the presentation. Here you'll see we are wrapping up demolition work and moving into the first phase of development. On the industrial or southern portion of the campus, earthwork began last month, and we expect vertical construction to begin in the fourth quarter of this year. On the innovation campus on the north side of the site, we expect earthwork to begin in the fourth quarter of 2023 and vertical construction to begin in the third quarter of 2024. And as always, we're continuing to provide project updates and opportunities for all of you to provide feedback during our quarterly public meetings, as well as kind of smaller engagements with nonprofit and community organizations, through our annual survey and through our ongoing series of small in-person focus groups. Next slide. So wanted to provide a quick update on demolition. To date, we are 92% way through demolishing the former refinery. This means 89% of tanks have been demolished, 93% of piping has been removed, and 99% of legacy petroleum products have been removed. It's also worth noting that when the refinery came offline, there was a 16% reduction in our city's carbon emissions. So with that, I'll turn over to the environmental team.
Thanks, Mia. I'm Joe Jure. I'm with our environmental remediation team, and I'm going to give just a brief update on the activities associated with the cleanup of soil and groundwater at the property. First, as a way to review for folks, the agreement that we entered into when we purchased this property with the prior property owner, Evergreen Sunoco. Sunoco operated this refinery for a large portion of its history and is in the process of conducting environmental cleanup activities under the state's regulatory program, which is commonly referred to as Act 2. And so we have an agreement with Evergreen that identifies who's responsible for doing certain cleanup activities at the property. And the basis of that agreement is that for contamination that was present at the property prior to September of 2012, Evergreen Sunoco is continuing to work through the regulatory process with the state for conducting sampling and cleanup activities to demonstrate that contamination has been adequately addressed. And they're also responsible for conducting sampling beneath the former refinery process units after those have been removed. Those have been removed at this point, and Evergreen conducted the sampling of the soils beneath those units. And then, sorry, Matt, I wasn't, there you go. So Hilco, Pesram and Hilco, HRP, is responsible for the assessment and cleanup of contamination that occurred after that date, September of 2012. And we're conducting specific remediation or cleanup in specific areas of the property where contamination that occurred after that date has been identified. We're also responsible for sampling beneath the storage tanks after those have been removed, which for the most part, those have been removed at this point, and I'll provide an update on the status of that sampling in a couple of slides. We're also responsible for the management of soil during redevelopment in accordance with a soil management plan that was approved by PADEP in June of 2020, as well as the assessment of vapor intrusion for new buildings, which refers to the process for evaluating whether chemicals that are present in soil and groundwater have the potential to migrate into the indoor air of newly constructed buildings. So we have responsibility to evaluate whether that may occur, and if there's the potential for it, to mitigate it or to prevent it from happening in accordance with applicable PADEP regulations. Next slide. So to provide an update on three particular areas of our work, the first is the work that we're doing under the state's cleanup program known as Act 2. There are 5 specific and distinct areas of the site where there are releases that occurred after that September 2012 date. They're shown here on this map. We've talked about these in some of our past public meetings and provided a little more detail on each of them individually. So tonight I'm just going to focus broadly on identifying them and providing an update. For more information on these, we have regulatory reports that are made available on our website, thebellwetherdistrict.com, and there's information about that here on this slide. Next one, Matt. So this table just summarizes the status of those 5 release areas that I mentioned on the prior slide and that were shown on that map. Again, you'll notice the date of release. All of these occurred after September of 2012. So PESRM HRP is taking responsibility for addressing this contamination and conducting cleanup in accordance with the state regulations. You'll notice on each of these, we have the current status and the next steps. The first, number 3 separator, is in a period of groundwater monitoring. There's no active remediation being conducted there at this time. The second, the UDEX release area, which is an area of the refinery, a former refinery process. The UDEX process, there was a release that occurred there in 2018. We highlighted this release in one of our prior public meetings, but it is the largest release for which we are responsible for cleanup, and really the one that has the most active remediation that's occurring. We're currently conducting a soil vapor extraction remedy in this area, which we'll provide just a brief update on the next slide. These other 3 releases are smaller releases that occurred more recently and are in various stages of the regulatory reporting process. The remediation for each of these involved the excavation of contaminated soil and subsequent offsite disposal. And we're currently working with the state to document the completion of cleanup activities in those areas. Next slide, Matt. So again, the UDEX release area is the one where we've been conducting active remediation. This was an underground pipeline leak in 2018 that involved the release of multiple hundreds of thousands of gallons of oil to the subsurface. And this chart just shows the efforts that have been conducted since 2018 to recover that oil. We're up as of last month. We surpassed 200,000 gallons that have either been recovered or destroyed through the remediation efforts that we've undertaken. So it was a milestone for the remediation effort. We still have some some work to do there, but we feel as though we're making progress towards ultimately getting that release area to a place where we can demonstrate that the cleanup has been sufficient to meet the regulatory requirements. Next slide. The next area of remediation work that I'll just touch on briefly is AST activities. It's above ground storage tank activities. As I mentioned at the beginning of my portion of the presentation, the responsibility for sampling underneath above ground storage tanks following their demolition was something that HRP PESRM has taken on as a result of our acquisition of this property. There were hundreds of storage tanks that have been demolished, and we are working to complete sampling under those tanks in accordance with PADEP requirements. This map on the slide here just shows that we've divided the tanks into groups, and we're working through a group closure process. Sampling has been started in 7 of the 9 tank groups that have been identified, and we're working on reporting and have been in discussions with the state on the documentation of those sampling efforts in pursuit of an eventual regulatory closure. The reports associated with that sampling are available on our website, thebellwetherdistrict.com. Finally, the last area of remediation work that I'll discuss this evening is soil management. As I mentioned, the redevelopment plans for the property include a soil management plan, which outlines how soil at the property will be moved around, will be relocated to allow for the redevelopment to occur. Because the site has such a long industrial history, much of the soil is contaminated and needs to be managed appropriately to ensure that, you know, it's placed ultimately in areas where it's not accessible and doesn't pose you know, a chance of people coming in contact with contamination. So the way we've done that is we've developed a soil management plan where we characterize the soil. We go out and we sample it prior to it being moved to identify which soil is okay to use in areas that are closer to the surface and which soil should be placed under development features such as parking lots or buildings to prevent people from accessing it. And so that's what's covered here in the soil management plan. This slide just shows a brief sort of summary of the work that we've done. We've collected a lot of samples to characterize the majority of the soil at the property. And again, details regarding the sampling and the results are available on our website.
Thanks, Joe. Good evening, everybody, and thanks so much for joining us. My name is Melissa Schrock, and I lead the mixed-use development team at HRP. We're excited to share with you tonight our in-progress plans for the first phases of development at the Bellwether District. Next slide, please. As you all know, HRP purchased a site in 2020 and began the enormous undertaking of decommissioning and deconstructing the oil refinery. As you heard from Mia a moment ago, that work is nearing completion, which allows us the ability to focus increasingly on the future transformation of the site. As an oil refinery, the site was home to one employer in a single industry, but in the future, the site will be home to dozens of employers in a wide range of industries, from logistics and distribution to light manufacturing to research and development. This will provide more diverse and resilient employment opportunities to Philadelphians across a broad spectrum of professions and contribute significantly to the economic development of the region. Next. Tonight, you'll hear more about the 2 sides of the campus we're planning and the first phase of development on each side. The innovation area to the north of Passyunk Avenue is anticipated to house approximately 3 to 4 million square feet of life science, biomanufacturing, pharmaceutical, and other innovative uses that build upon Philadelphia's world-class academic institutions and its position as a global leader in cell and gene therapy. Over time, it's estimated that this area could be home to 8,500 jobs in these growing industries. The industrial and logistics area to the south of Passyunk could support over 10 million square feet of modern storage, distribution, and light manufacturing facilities, leveraging Philadelphia's prime location on the eastern seaboard and bringing over 10,000 new 21st century jobs to the city. Next. As we tackle the significant task of redeveloping a site like this, we've identified 3 principles to guide our physical planning. The first principle is to reintegrate the site. Having been an oil refinery for well over a century, the site was fenced off from the surrounding community and really functioned like a bit of an island in South Philly. In many ways, the city grew up around the site with few points of connection either through or to PES. The challenge now, as we redevelop the land, is how to reintegrate it into the city in a thoughtful manner while contending with the Schuylkill River, which forms a natural barrier on one side, and I-76, which forms a man-made barrier on the other. Our second principle is to create green pathways as we build these new connections. Using the city's complete streets and other guidelines to inform our site designs, we have an opportunity to create new, welcoming, and green sidewalks and cycle paths within the district. And the last principle is to create a sustainable district. As we design and construct new streets, buildings, and other site elements, we're incorporating a variety of strategies to reduce carbon emissions, increase resilience to climate change, and encourage the use of renewable energy. Even though we're early in the project, these strategies are already being incorporated and will continue to be developed as the project makes progress. George?
Good evening, everyone. My name is George Needs. I'm with the mixed-use development team here at Hilco Redevelopment Partners. And as Melissa mentioned, we've identified 3 key project goals that we feel and the community feels that are really important to address as we develop the master plan framework. Now, that first goal, reintegrating the site into the city and the city's existing networks. Now, as Melissa mentioned, with this site having been home to the largest oil refinery on the East Coast.
Recording in progress.
For over a century. I think there's, someone's got their microphone on. There we go. Okay, there we go. So the city has effectively grown around it, and what that's done is it's created a large void. And so the first challenge we had was to think about how we reintegrated the site and tied it back into the city fabric, and in particular how we create new access points to enable new connections to be made into the existing street, bicycle, pedestrian, and transit networks. So on the next slide, you can see this illustrates the existing street network. As Melissa mentioned, the site has a couple of barriers to it. You have the Schuylkill River to the west, a natural barrier, and then to the east you have a natural barrier of I-76. But I think one of the benefits to the site is it is bounded by some key access routes in the form of I-76, Passyunk Avenue, 26th Street, and Penrose Avenue. So we have the benefit of being located in close proximity to these important access routes. However, we need to identify how these connections are made and how circulation will occur internal to our site, as we illustrate on the next slide. So the next slide shows or presents what we are looking at as the new sort of primary street connections. And we've identified those in red, and those will provide key north-south circulation through the site and will tie into the existing road network. Now, this isn't the full extent of the internal road network, as there is intended to be secondary roads where they are required, particularly on the innovation campus located at the north of the site. However, those shown on the plan on the screen are intended to function as the primary connections. On the next slide, this sort of, one of the primary areas of concern when developing or redeveloping a site like this are sort of any traffic impacts that may be generated as a result. And as with planning any development of scale, we were required to complete what is known as a traffic impact study. And what this does, it identifies the trips that are generated from the project and analyzes these future traffic conditions against the existing traffic conditions. And this is all done in coordination with PennDOT and with the city street department, and in conjunction with their traffic engineers to identify and propose both on-site and off-site traffic improvements that mitigate and alleviate any traffic impacts generated by the project. Just talking about where we are in the process. So we've performed the traffic impact study, which involved completing several rounds of review. And from that, it was identified a series of proposed improvements as it relates to the full build conditions. So that's the, a set of phased improvements that have been identified, in a phased manner across the full development or the full build out of the site. Given the scale of the project and the timeline associated with the project, and the fact that a lot can change between now and when the project is complete, it was requested that we adopt a phased approach. And that will require us to adopt this or update this study with every phase of the project. And what this will do, it will allow us to use real traffic data as we build out the project. And it will also ensure that the traffic mitigation that we're going to be providing with each phase is aligned with the actual data and the actual traffic impacts as the site gets built out. Next slide, please. Yep. So in the spirit of promoting multimodal and green transit, the project is also planning for bike and pedestrian connections through the site, which will facilitate a north-south connection into the existing bike network located at Grays Ferry Avenue and down to Penrose Avenue. And next slide, please. And lastly, we are also coordinating with SEPTA as we identify opportunities to bring public transit to the site. As you can see on the slide on the screen, this illustrates the existing SEPTA bus network, and you'll see there are existing services that operate in and around the site, namely the G37 and 68 routes. And over the coming months, we'll be working with SEPTA to develop a plan that looks at opportunities to bring service to the project in a phased approach through a combination of extending existing services and potentially providing new services where necessary. And we will continue to provide updates as we work through that coordination. Next slide, please. So the second goal, this really looks at creating green pathways through the site and looks at how we create a public realm and street network that is safe, multimodal, and uses landscaping to connect open spaces and provide enjoyable pedestrian experiences and to help manage stormwater runoff through landscape and green infrastructure. On the next slide, you'll see a map that illustrates a future connection that will provide a safe and enjoyable pedestrian and bike connection through the site and will help to weave some of the city's important green and active spaces together, from Pennovation at the north of the site all the way down to FDR Park. And along the way, we're looking to find opportunities to take advantage of the riverfront as we build these important connections through the site.
Thanks, George. Good evening, everybody. My name is Kurt Carter, Vice President of Industrial Development here at the Bellwether District. We're going to keep going with the project goals here. In number 3, creating the sustainable district. The good news is closing the refinery and completing all the demolitions that were outlined on a previous slide. We have reduced emissions in Philadelphia by 16% just through that demolition alone. The next goals up for us are we are looking to raise the entire site out of the 100-year floodplain, and more specifically building pads out of the 500-year floodplain. So in doing that, we're trying to not import any fills to be able to make those elevations. Right now, we're programming pretty much a net balanced site, carrying a little bit of a surplus just in case we hit any unknowns. Then we get into the buildings themselves. So we do anticipate that a lot of the buildings here are going to be LEED certifiable. And then we're also evaluating a lot of solar and EV charging and infrastructure possibilities for potential future tenants on the site. And by doing so, we're hoping to reduce a lot of the fossil fuels, not only through the vehicles that will be on site, but also through some other alternative energies. Next slide, Matt. So this is a follow-on for most of our sustainability objectives and initiatives. Again, looking at state-of-the-art infrastructure that would accommodate solar vehicles, solar-ready facilities, potentially including some battery-type assets as well, so that when we've captured that sun power, we can put it somewhere and store it until we use it later. Also looking at a lot of native landscaping plans and things like bioswales in those landscaping plans to help absorb additional CO2 in the atmosphere here in the city. We're also, again, looking at bringing up all the low-lying areas of the site out of that 100-year floodplain for a little bit of flood resiliency, and doing that with on-site cut to fill. Then again, our future buildings, we are looking at all the current regulatory standards and things of that nature to try to get these buildings up to that LEED certifiable level, with the final tweaks being made by future potential tenants. And then finally, we are anticipating thousands of new trees and plantings across the entire 1,300-acre property. Next slide, Matt. So we want to get into some of the flood mitigation and the mapping efforts that have gone on so far. The project team has been working over the last 2 years on our initial studies. These studies were performed with FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. And during this time, we've studied over about 9.5 miles of the Schuylkill River. And in those 9.5 miles, there were 17 bridge structures that all affected some of those water levels, about 17.5 square miles of surface modeling, so kind of the topography that's adjacent to the river and the river frontage. All the additional drainage areas that lead into the river itself, which turned out to be about 1,900 square miles, which equates to just about 92,000 football fields, to bring it home for all you football fans out there. Next slide, Matt. So this is a secondary flood mapping and mitigation version here. On the right, we'll start with this picture and graphic. So everything that's outlined in red and kind of has the rose-colored infill is where the 100-year floodplain exists on our site today. As you can see, the Phase 1 Innovation Campus up to the north, outlined in blue, is well out of that 100-year floodplain. And as well, the Phase 1 Industrial Campus, outlined in blue, just south of Passyunk, is also out of that 100-year floodplain. So strategically, this is part of our earth moving plan, and in line with some of the regulations that Joe Duray had outlined before, we're looking to move a lot of the dirt and the soils after characterization from these areas that are higher ground today to some of the lower lying areas to be able to mass balance this entire site. And by doing so, bring up the 100-year floodplain, or bring the site up out of the 100-year floodplain. So getting over to the bullet points, important to note that we did work with FEMA over this 2-year process. They did provide us with a final determination and also copied the city of Philadelphia on that. That was back in November 2022. In addition to all the mapping revisions, we're also looking at being under PADEP kind of regulation, not only for the existing conditions that we inherited with the refinery, but also when we're in the under construction phase and then at the final stormwater phase. So there will be multiple different regulatory permits that we are bound by in each phase of this construction. And then finally, when we get to that final condition, we're looking at a lot of new drainage infrastructure, new piping networks, swales, retention basins. All these things are going to help kind of slow the flow of water to the river and ensure that we're removing any of the types of items that you'd find in that stormwater as it comes in contact with that final ground surface. Next slide, Matt. So we're going to walk through some of these initial industrial portion of this master planning framework that we've been working on so far. Next slide. So what you're looking at here is just the industrial and logistics portion of the campus. This is found further to the south. So we have Passyunk Avenue on this graphic to the north. Then you have 26th Street over on the right or the east. So as you can see, our phase one that has been previously outlined is just over 1 million square feet and is comprised of 2 buildings, the southern building being about 326,000 and that northern building being just over 700,000. Next slide, Matt. So in order to get people, products in and out of these buildings, as George had touched on before, a lot of traffic planning, a lot of traffic studying has been going on. What you're looking at here is the overall outline of the parcel and then an outline of our phase one with the 2 buildings demarked in a dotted line. So what this is showing really is that this whole area is relatively devoid of roadway and existing infrastructure in order to be able to connect everybody to these new assets. Next slide, Matt. So to get us to a good spot of connectivity, basically for this first phase, we're looking at 2 different sections. I'm going to start with the offsite because I think that's going to be a lot more prevalent to everyone who travels 26th Street and in and around some of the minor arterials adjacent to the site. Really what we're looking at is a new signalized intersection at 26th and Hartramp Streets. Those upgrades are going to include additional turning lanes in multiple directions, acceleration and deceleration lanes to allow people to get slowed down to make turns and get up to speed to merge in, additional travel lanes just on the main line to be able to alleviate some of the traffic pressures, and then some of the ancillary alignments, pavement markings, and signage that come along with all of these larger improvements. And then coupled with the offsite, we're also looking at some of the on-site improvements of roadways, curbs, and sidewalks. Again, as George had hit on before, we're also looking at dedicated bike lanes and or multi-use paths to allow some more pedestrian and bike movements within this portion of the park. And then again, the on-site would have the full complement of pavement markings, landscaping, and signage to go with it. So if you can flip to the next slide, Matt, we'll take a look at where these may be. So what we have here is the red line is what's demarking the new streets that are proposed in our first phase. And then the dashed red lines would be potential additional new streets to be delivered in future phases. And one of the other call outs that we did want to show here was just with some of the additional parking for the trucks and trailers so that, as drivers or as users are going to be coming in, we can make sure that they have ample parking on site to try to discourage them from parking in areas either adjacent to the site where they shouldn't be, or even worse, residential areas that may be in proximity. Next slide, Matt. So this really gives us a good close-up of this proposed intersection at Hartramp and 26th Street. I'm going to start from the north or the top of the page. For everybody on the call, I'm sure everyone understands today this road is just a 2-lane, 2-direction street There is no intersection at this point today. The right in, right out on Hartramp Street does exist, and we are looking to maintain that as a right in, right out to preclude any type of truck traffic that really doesn't belong over in that portion of the neighborhood. So starting at the north, we are looking at adding an additional southbound travel lane and an additional southbound turn lane to be able to head westbound on Hartramp Street, which is a new proposed street. Then from the east, well, from the west side of this drawing, you would have 2 new lanes going into the facility on Hartramp Street. And then coming out of the facility, we're proposing a double left-hand turn to go north on 26th Street and a double left-hand turn to go south on 26th Street. Then coming from the south, we're also adding the acceleration lane and additional through lane. And then as you're coming north on 26th Street, we're looking at keeping the 2 lanes that are on 26 today and adding a double left-hand turn into the facility. So again, this is just one mitigant that George had touched on earlier. We are currently looking at HOP and TIS permits for this intersection. So still a little bit before this is all tied up with a bow and ready to build, but we are getting very close to effectuating this intersection. Next slide, Matt.
All right, thanks, Kurt. Hi, everyone. I'm Blake Rowan, Vice President of Development on the industrial side. I'm going to walk through our schedule as well as some updates on the earthwork and vertical side. So for our phase 1 on the industrial that Kurt just gave a precursor to, we are actually very excited to announce that we started earthwork last month. So we are currently working on building the actual building pads for both our lot 15 and our lot 16 building, with the anticipation of actually starting vertical construction in the 4th quarter of this year. And those buildings will take approximately about a year to complete. So hopefully by the end of next year, we will have the base buildings done for both of those lots. Next slide, please. So for the earthwork, we went through a pretty lengthy process to secure our permits that will allow us to actually move the soil on the site. We're able to get started with the sediment basins, and we're going to move that material around the site, ultimately to place and build our new building pads. We're focusing again just on our phase 1A area, which is our lots 11, 15, and 16. But that actually represents a couple 100,000 cubic yards of material. So it's pretty significant. We're expecting that the building pad for lot 15, which is our smaller building, will take us through the end of next month to ultimately get built. And we're actually putting on about 8 foot of additional material, which will actually start our ground improvement process, which will allow us to get started for vertical construction following suit. The lot 16 building pad will follow shortly after. That building pad should be done in September, October of this year. And then again, it'll have some additional ground improvements to get prepared for the new vertical construction, at which point we will continue on and start earthwork on other areas of the site. Next slide, please. So our lot 15 building, we are actually actively designing it. We're excited to share these renderings on the right-hand side of the slide. That gives you a daytime and nighttime view of what we anticipate this building to look like if you're standing at the corner of Hartramp and our new Francis Harper Drive. So this building is about 326,000 square feet. It's a cross-dock warehouse. We're designing it to be a single-use building. So building it today, speculative, but hopeful that a tenant will take the entire building. This building is really designed to be the state-of-the-art warehouse, e-commerce, logistics type building, 40-foot clear height inside the building. I think we're at 95 dock positions. We have about 130 trailer parking spaces. ample employee parking that exceed our code requirements, all LED lighting, and as Kurt alluded to earlier, we are going for LEED certification for these buildings. So we're very excited about that. The steel is actually going to be enhanced to be able to hold the solar panels on the roof. So this building, again, actively under design. We're going in for building permits in the very near term with expectations of getting started here by the end of this year. Next slide, please. So our lot 16 building, a little bit bigger, almost twice the size, 726,000 square foot. This building right now, we're designing to be potentially a dual tenant building. So you see your plan east and west side of the buildings, there's employee parking on either side. This will just give us flexibility in the event that this building becomes a multi-tenant use building, but we also do have the flexibility to have a single tenant, maybe a larger user, take this space. Similar to lot 15, this building is going to be a 40-foot clear building, cross dock. We're actually going to have 70-foot speed bays here, which are definitely new to the market, but something that I think a lot of tenants are looking for. So we're really excited about this one. This one's chasing a little bit behind it from a permit perspective. We're anticipating to go in through likely the end of summer for building permits and associated civil permits for this, but still likely to get started by the end of the fourth quarter of this year. So really excited to get started finally out here. We're also going to have all the new infrastructure that's going to tie into this lot 15 and lot 16 building. So just a lot of great progress here. So on the next slide, I think this moves us to our life science campus, our innovation.
Hi, my name is Amanda Mazey, and I'm the Director of Mixed Use, and I'm going to take you through the Phase 1 design of the Innovation Campus. Next slide. So Phase 1 of the Innovation Campus schedule follows industrial by approximately 6 months. We plan to begin earthwork at the end of this year, with vertical construction starting approximately 6 to 9 months later in Q3 2024, and construction completion will conclude in Q3 2025, lasting approximately 12 months. Next slide. So Phase 1 site plan. So our Innovation Campus Phase 1 is located north of Passyunk Avenue and directly between the Schuylkill River and I-76. It connects to Pennovation and University of Pennsylvania's campus directly via 34th Street. We chose this as our first phase because it's the closest to the existing infrastructure and the surrounding neighborhoods. Phase 1 is approximately 40 acres and 500,000 square feet and 3 buildings. And these first buildings are designed to accommodate biomanufacturing, processing, and production facilities, along with tech-oriented uses. Next slide. Zooming in further, here is more detail on our Phase 1 design and a few early initial renderings. The first 3 buildings range in size from 150 to 180,000 square feet. They will have large open floor plans and 40-foot clear interior ceiling heights. We're very focused on an urban campus feel with attention to lots of landscaping, central courtyards, dedicated bike lanes, protected sidewalks, and on-street parking. These buildings will have a highly designed exterior with a mix of glass and metal panel. Additionally, Building B will contain some amenity space for our employees with a fitness center, conference room, and a cafe. Next slide.
Great, thank you, Amanda. So wanted to provide a few quick updates on our community efforts. We've had a busy last few months on the corporate affairs team. Matt, if you could go to the next slide. One of our biggest initiatives was around Earth Day in April. On Earth Day, our team took part in a cleanup and beautification project at Finnegan Playground in Grays Ferry in partnership with several local organizations, including Resident Action Committee 2, the Grays Ferry Community Council, and also Councilman Kenyatta Johnson's office. And so during that event, we painted the Finnegan Playground Community Center, planted new plants and flowers, and picked up litter in and around the park. So just a huge thank you to our partners on that event. We're grateful for your partnership. Matt, next slide. On the same day, we announced a series of donations to environmental organizations as part of our Touchdown for Sustainability program, which we held in partnership with the Philadelphia Eagles. Through that partnership, we committed funding to for each touchdown that the Eagles made this past season. And because of their incredible season, we were able to donate $75,000 in donations to 5 deserving recipients. And so the first group of donations went to each of the major Graysbury parks, Finnegan Playground, Singer Square Park, and Lanier Park. The second went to Bartram's Garden and the Partnership for the Delaware Estuary, which, if you're not familiar with that project, Bartram's and PDE are in the process of building a mussel hatchery and environmental education center at Bartram's Garden. I've learned a lot about mussels in the last year and a half. Freshwater mussels naturally purify river water, and there are groups of mussels installed on the banks of the Schuylkill as part of this project that will help naturally kind of clean and purify the water. And then the education center, which is part of the project, will serve kids and families not only in the neighborhood, but throughout our city and region. So excited to support that project. And then last but not least, our third recipient was the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia's Center for Health Equity. And the funds donated will support home environmental remediation for CHOP patients that are experiencing asthma or other respiratory illnesses. And those funds will go specifically towards residents living in South and Southwest Philly that neighbor our project. Matt, if you could go to the next slide. So our team has been kind of out and about in the community at events this past quarter, which you'll see here. A lot of this work was focused on engaging students. So just as some examples, we participated in the school district's workforce development and internship fair to recruit students for our summer internship program. Our team was out at the Broad Street Run Expo sharing information about the Bellwether District. We attended Girls Inc.'s annual event, during which one of our summer 2022 interns was honored, which was really exciting. And we participated in Universal Unread Charter School's annual community resource fair. Next slide, Matt. So on that note, just quickly, we're wrapping up recruitment for our 2023 summer internship program, which you may have seen on our social media channels. Our summer program is a 6-week paid opportunity focused on rising junior and senior high school students. HRP and several of our partner organizations are hosting interns as part of our program, and there are a few open positions left. So if you're interested, my contact information will be put in the chat and shared at the end of the presentation, so please reach out to me. Additionally, excited to share that following feedback from one of our recent focus groups, we are in the initial stages of launching a middle school version of that internship program, which we hope to roll out later this year. So stay tuned for more information on that. Matt, next slide. Thank you. Want to provide a quick update on the community benefits agreement process. For those of you who are new to the conversation, HRP formally committed to carrying out a voluntary CBA last year. A CBA is a commitment made between a developer and community members that really solidifies the community's input in a project and how a developer gives back. So we officially launched that CBA process in April, and hope to have a completed CBA by first quarter of 2024. And while early in the process, we will continue to provide updates during our regularly scheduled public meeting. Next slide, Matt. Last, we wanted to share the date of our next public meeting, which will occur September 26th at 6 p.m. So save the date. We'll share more information on that meeting as we get closer. So that's it for tonight's formal presentation. We're going to open things up to Q&A. I want to start with 2 questions that were pre-submitted in advance of the meeting. The first is, will the Bellwether District plan allow bicycle and pedestrian access from South Philly neighborhoods through the Science Campus or the Logistics Warehouse District to Schuylkill River waterfront? I'm going to kick that one over to George.
Great. So hopefully, as you sort of gleaned from the presentation we just shared, we are planning for those connections. And I think while we are in the early planning stages, as we've sort of presented as part of our master plan framework, the project is committed to integrating the site to the surrounding neighborhoods and delivering a network that will support a multimodal transit, which will incorporate both pedestrian and bicycle accommodations and connections throughout the site. So I think these are going to be important connection points that will allow users, both pedestrians and bike users, to access the site and make a connection through the site as part of their daily commute or as part of visiting or traveling to the site. And these are going to, as part of that, we're going to provide key connection points that will obviously connect the site to the surrounding community, the street network, and surrounding infrastructure.
Great, thank you. George, you might as well stay on. We're going to ask the next one of you as well. Will the plan also allow access along the Schuylkill River waterfront for the length of the development?
Yeah, so our goal, our sort of long-term planning goal is to develop a publicly accessible open space along the Schuylkill River waterfront, and obviously throughout the larger site as well. Due to its historical use as an oil refinery, the site is subject to regulatory and third-party restrictions and covenants, and that limits our ability to create publicly accessible recreational space today. But as we previewed in the presentation slides, we are incorporating the accommodation of these publicly accessible open spaces into our long-range planning that will allow us to take advantage of the waterfront in certain locations as we plan for bike lanes and new landscape connections. So while there are some challenges that exist today, our sort of long-term goal is to be able to provide those key sort of green connections through the site.
Thank you. Our next question comes from the Q&A chat. Has the pedestrian bridge to Snyder Avenue over I-76 been removed? I'm going to call on Kurt to answer that one.
Thanks, Mia. I'm going to anticipate that this was about the pedestrian bridge closer to Morris Street than Snyder. It has not been demolished, and it lands on either side of 76 on really properties that are not owned by HRP. If I remember correctly, it's really not in great shape for pedestrians as it exists today. But we have not demolished that bridge and don't have any immediate plans to do any work on it.
Thank you. Next question in the chat. When will you be sharing the traffic impact study with neighboring communities? I'm going to go to you, Kurt.
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think that we're getting close. I think there's a couple of permits that need to be finalized, and right now our goal would be to carve out time in the next public meeting to go through the TIS a little bit more at length, just so that we can talk through some of those proposed mitigants and some of the other contents of that TIS.
Thanks, Kurt. We have one more question in a couple more minutes. So did I hear correctly that you're exceeding parking requirements? So we'll go to Blake for that one.
Yeah, thanks, Mia. So specific to the tenant that we expect to ultimately service these buildings, we have designed the buildings in accordance with the local building codes. So there's ample amount of auto parking specific for employees, as well as trailer parking specific to the square footage of the building. So the local building codes have specific ratios of a certain amount of spaces per square footage. Sometimes that's 1 per 1,000. It really depends on the zoning, the type of building, but we are going to meet and likely exceed those requirements. Thanks.
Thank you. We have a new question. I assume that residential uses are not allowed due to contamination. Will there be any retail entertainment uses allowed? Joe, I see you coming off camera. Why don't you answer that one?
Yep. So it's a good question. Correct. Residential uses will not be allowed as part of the regulatory closure. In terms of retail and entertainment uses, generally speaking, commercial uses are anticipated as part of the regulatory process. Specifics around that will be determined in coordination with Evergreen and with the state on exactly what uses are and are not allowed, but we do anticipate that retail is something that would be considered acceptable.
Great, thank you. We have some new questions coming in. Are building height constraints due to the Philadelphia flight path, the Philadelphia Airport flight path?
I think we both chimed in. I can take the first stab at it, Kurt, and then if you want to chime in as well. Fortunately, our building heights are outside of the proximity to the airport. We actually have, if you look at the bridge just prior to our site connecting to Penrose, that's actually going to exceed any of the building heights that we're going to have on site. So no concerns there. Thank you.
Okay, it looks like we have a live question. So Matt, if you would move that person over to a panelist to ask their question live. Thank you.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. As a business owner nearby, I was trying to ask about the pedestrian bridge on Snyder Avenue. There's a news article, January 13th, 2023, by Mike Dianorio. It looks like there's supposed to be one, so not the Morris Street Bridge, but yes, there was at least someone was planning a pedestrian bridge on Snyder Avenue. Now, I don't necessarily, either way, my business would be okay, but it's important for us to kind of know as soon as whether or not there's going to be a pedestrian bridge or anything there, or not at all. So appreciate it.
Hi, Robert. Melissa here. I'll try to answer that question. I'm not familiar with the article that you're referring to, but I will say that we have in our planning for the site tried to think a little bit out of the box. There's no current design to actually build a pedestrian bridge over I-76, but some of our in-process drawings have done some of this blue sky thinking where we think about what are the ways that we could reconnect. We talked a lot about reintegrating the site into the surrounding urban context and making connections to the adjacent neighborhoods tonight. That's a primary goal of ours. So I suspect that bridge was on an early drawing representing some of those initial sort of blue sky thoughts that we've had, but there's currently no design to do that. Obviously, a bridge or any structure over I-76 would require significant approvals, both at the local level with the city, but also at the state and of course at the federal level, because that's a federal highway.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for your question.
Okay, we have, and Matt, thank you very much, Matt. We have a new question. How will the vacant land be landscaped before future phases are built. I'm going to turn this one over to you, Kurt.
Thanks, Mia. The vacant land that is further out, most of it today is covered with a lot of impervious from the previous use. So the good news is, as we work through the entire process of development, there's still a lot of remnant concrete slabs. There's still a lot of remnant paved areas and items that are going to, really preclude a lot of rain and those types of things from coming in contact. So right now, there's no plan to landscape additionally in future phases. If we are using any of those areas for, stockpiling or things like that, it would be subject to incremental stabilization, grass seed, establishing turf, things like that, to minimize any type of ENS runoffs and dust, those types of mitigants.
Thank you. We have a new question in the chat. Will there be an updated visual of the ground layout / building / design? Will there be opportunity for small retail business? Melissa?
Sure, thanks, Mia. So we're going to continue to update our designs. Obviously, when tackling a site this large, it's very hard to know exactly today how everything is going to look when it's finally built out. So we've shown the overall master plan with what we anticipate will be both the major roadways and connection points to and through the site, connecting back to the city. We don't know all of the future building footprints, where all the parking lots will be, where all the landscaping will be yet, where parking garages might be. So a lot of that is yet to be determined. So that's why you saw a little more detail in the phase 1 drawings that we shared tonight on both the industrial side of the campus and then also the innovation side of the campus, is because we know more. We've started designing buildings for those discrete areas. But as we continue to build out both those first phases and further the designs of that, we'll be able to share more progress on the drawings. And then, of course, as we start other future phases, start the planning and design of those future phases, we'll be able to add more detail in as we go. And then I would just say, yes, there will, to the extent we build retail on the site, I would expect that we will have opportunities for local small businesses to take advantage of that space. Right now, for the moment, we haven't planned any retail buildings yet, because we just have to get the first users on the site so that there would actually be demand for retail space. But absolutely, as we build that out over time, I expect there will be lots of opportunities for local businesses.
Thank you, Melissa. Next question relating to our flood study and mitigation efforts. How may the increased height of the site change the dynamic of the river, land interface, and possibly increase the water levels on the west bank, affecting flooding, Passyunk, and Essington Avenue properties? Thank you.
Thanks, Mia and Craig. I think it's important to go back to the overall site height is not just increasing unilaterally. It's an overall cut fill strategy by where we're taking soils from the higher portions of the site today and then reorienting those to the lower portions of the site. And essentially it's flattening the entire site to help with some of those runoff concerns. From the outcome of the FEMA study that was performed, it's very minimal impact to the river level overall, and that's with the flood or with the tide changes. So again, between the cut fill strategy and then all of the bioswales, the new piping, a lot of the retention basins, and a lot of the water quantity control measures that we're looking at putting in throughout the entire delivery of this program, it should be minimal impacts on the river and the West Bank properties.
Great, thank you, Kurt. As of right now, we have no additional questions in the chat. Want to make one more call for questions for our presenters? Okay. Not a question, but more of a comment from Chris Major on behalf of the Center for Health Equity at Children's Hospital. Thank you for HRP and the Bellwether District for supporting our program. Thank you so much, Chris. We really appreciate your partnership at CHOP. And thanks for being here tonight. Yeah, so we're done tonight's Q&A. If there, we'll do one last call for questions. But if not, please do look for the recording from tonight's meeting, as well as the presentation deck and Q&A for all questions asked this evening on our website at thebellwetherdistrict.com. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and we'll see you in September for our next public meeting. Have a good night.